We leave the days of thunder as our journey continues into a new era of these forgotten realms, a time of giants and dragons, a time of war for dominion and religious strife, the birth of dragon gods and the migration of new settlers upon these lands. 6,000 years of conflict, origin stories, and historic lore. The Dawn Age, right now on Riches and Liches. Welcome, adventurers, scholars, and world builders. I'm Rich, and this is Riches and Liches, dedicated to dungeons, dragons, and tales of lore. As we begin to illuminate the most significant of events having a direct impact upon the Forgotten Realms during this journey and profile into the Dawn Age, I want to also remind you that there are 3 tangential yet no less fascinating tales, 2 of which actually happen off-world in and around this timeline that also well deserve to be told. Allow me a moment to offer a brief preview of these sagas, the full breadth of which will be explored in future volumes that are already in production. First, we have the War of the Seldarine, the tale of power and betrayal that will forever shape the destiny of the Elven people and unfurl the true form of the Elven goddess Araushni, who you may know better as Lolth. Next, we have the War of Fang and Talon, an Alberian saga of dragon rebellion that will have many stark similarities to the Time of Dragons we will explore today. And finally, there's the tale of the first dragon rider, an almost fable-like saga of courage that defies the laws of dragons, gods, and men. All 3 of these tales will make for some concise, tight future narratives, so please look for those in the coming weeks. That said, let us proceed with the history of these Forgotten Realms, Volume 4, The Time of Dragons. The Dawn Age, as it is most officially titled, is an era spanning the 6 millennia from approximately -30,000 to -24,000 Dale Reckoning, that stands as yet another critical time in the historical record of these Forgotten Realms. Lord Ao has sundered the planet into 2 worlds, effectively giving life a new start on the planet now called Toril, no longer impeded by the primordial wars of chaos. This era, alternatively known as the Time of Dragons and the Time of Giants, marks a transitional period characterized by the waning influence of the once mighty creator races. At the outset of this Dawn Age, the world once again bore witness to the twilight of another creator race and the rise of new powers. As covered in previous volumes, the empires of the Batraki and Saruk, having sculpted much of the world's early history, have now been removed from this grand chessboard, the remainder of their species now driven into exile, while the third creator race, the Avian Aerie, who once dominated the skies of Toril, have already begun their own inexorable decline, crumbling under the shadow of an emerging draconic dominance. They too will soon fade into the written history of the realm. In the vacuum left by their diminishing presence, 2 formidable forces emerge to claim dominion over the lands, the Giants of Ostoria and the burgeoning dragonkind. Their ascendancy setting up the inevitable clash as the factional powers compete for realm superiority, while the many lesser species of the land, including humankind, were just beginning to emerge from the prehistoric caves of their own dark age. It is a period steeped in myth and legend, where the narratives of power, conflict, and origin all intersect to shape the evolution of Faerun's historical lore and the ancestry to follow. We have lots to cover during these 6 millennia, and it all starts with the first flight of dragons. You don't get an entire epoch named after you unless you make a significant and historical impact upon the era in which you were present, and there is no doubt that dragonkind did exactly that. While the Giants of Ostoria would find their own success a bit later in this era, it is the dragon's meteoric rise to early prominence that is most notable, as their presence both expanded rapidly while exerting influence all across the vast expanses of Faerun. It was not long after their emergence upon Toril that the dragons realized their own strengths and abilities, as well as the lack of competition for land or resources from their contemporaries. This in turn fostered the draconic belief that the other races of the realm were beneath them, and it was upon this realization, fueled by their own ambition, that dragonkind embarked on a series of expansive conquests to exert control and reshape the contours of power all across the continent. Central to this effort was the event known as the First Flight of Dragons. This moment signified the dragons' collective assertion as one of, if not the, most formidable rulers of the land. The First Flight of Dragons was an early and mighty display of draconic power as the dragons descended upon and expedited the downfall of the Are empires by launching devastating assaults against the avian civilization that at one time dominated land and sky. Historically speaking, it would be an obscure and only vaguely referenced draconic general in service to Tiamat and named Nagamat, who first signaled the beginning of the end for the third creator race. Nagamat, a name that would become synonymous with the early rise of draconic ferocity, led this first flight of dragons in a brutal campaign against the Aeari enclaves, whose rise to their own brief but bright prominence reached its zenith less than 9 centuries previous. The avian race, perhaps complacent in having enjoyed the luxury of their sophisticated skyward societies, soaring spires, and what was at one time a clear and distinct aerial advantage against previous adversaries, now found themselves ill-prepared for the fight and might of dragonkind. And these dragons did much more than fill a Darwinian role of an apex predator on the hunt. They were vastly intelligent conquerors who mercilessly slaughtered the declining Aeari, emboldened by the divine mandate and growing tyranny of Tiamat, whose hunger for dominion and cruelty knew no bounds. The once sprawling and glorious avian empires, perched upon the loftiest mountain peaks, were savagely razed to the ground by fiery breath and feather-ripping claw. The skies, which had once echoed blue with the songs of the Aeari, now turned deeply crimson from both the red-scaled draconic flight and the blood of the Aeari, as each of the sky Ares fell one by one. Vaiaku, Fukri, and of course Shara, all crumbled under the immense onslaught. This utter defeat effectively erasing the Aeari from the historical landscape and driving any survivors into exile, many fleeing to Ankarome. While many historical accounts attribute this brutal one-sided conflict as nothing more than the start of draconic dominance, which it most certainly was, there are at least 2 additional narratives, far more obscure theories as to why the Aeari were the chosen target of such early draconic wrath. The first, which we will touch on a bit later, has some historians suggesting that this first flight of dragons was also the first Rage of Dragons, a periodic and realm-wide event that sent dragonkind into senseless, bloodthirsty rages, of which at least 7 have been historically recorded. And that may in fact be true. However, I would also posit another contributing factor for such unrelenting aggression that was also far more personal in nature. You may recall in Volume 3 of the History of These Forgotten Realms, we discussed the Aeari's taming, experimentation, and even genetic breeding of the landworms of the realm, eventually creating the species we know today as wyverns, which the Aeari used as cavalry mounts. While debate certainly exists to this day on the level, if any, of genetic ties the wyverns actually have to dragons, it is very likely that at some point in their ancient history they shared some ancestral blood. However, any true lineage actually matters very little, if at all. The wyverns' visual similarities alone would very plausibly gain the attention and ire of dragonkind. No DNA testing is required when a high-intelligence creature such as the dragon sees what at least looks like an ancestral cousin of yours being tamed like a pet. Regardless, the fall of the Aeari was as certain as it was swift. And although finding an inglorious end, the Aeari nonetheless left a mark in this, their final chapter of history, as the progenitors and ancient ancestors to the Aarakocra, Kinku, and owlbears present today, passing the mantle to the new dominant species and establishing dragonkind as the sovereigns of the skies and the lands below, their wings casting long shadows over the landscape of the Forgotten Realms. The first flight of dragons marked more than just the crumbling of the ARE empires. It highlighted two significant aspects of dragonkind that are completely foreign to the nature of the species today, yet they must be noted as critical factors for the early successes of their kind. These were the ability of dragonkind to unify and work together toward a common goal, as well as the lack of the many fractures and factions of alignment, dogma, and ideology that the species is so well known for today. And while this stance would most certainly see change during this era, to the great benefit of nearly every other race, I might add, still these factors cannot be overstated in terms of their contribution to the early growth, dominance even, of dragons upon the realm. This draconic ascendance, unchallenged in the early part of this era, was mostly characterized by a culture that deemed those who were not of dragonkind as lesser races, where many species lived under the shadow of these winged monarchs. While some served willingly, drawn by the awe-inspiring power and the promise of protection, most did not, as many humanoid species were left to feel the crushing rule of a draconic-controlled realm under chromatic subjugation, their spirits unbroken, but their freedoms curtailed. While the fractured lines of good and evil among the chromatic and metallic dragons would not yet be established, it has been suggested that it was here that the earliest cracks in dragon solidarity began to form, with metallic variants detesting the practice of subjugation and enslavement, and even showing kindness to those in forced servitude. The dragons, once united, now found themselves increasingly at odds with each other at almost every turn, as divergent philosophies and a clash of personalities would only rise. Despite the growing tensions and internal discontent, many draconic leaders, using the labor of these enslaved captives, built mighty fortresses leading to the establishment of vast territories falling under the control of various chromatic dragon lords. 4 of these early and sinister draconic empires are known to history. Argus Philiax, nestled in the spine of the world, was governed by a cunning and intelligent white dragon. To the west of the Sea of Fallen Stars in the Sunset Mountains sat Cason Malsevere under the rule of a tyrannical red dragon. Another, Darastravathica, controlled the High Forest and was led by a scheming and manipulative green dragon. And the 4th and most foul, Tharkrix Gahantix, reigned in the swampy marshlands of the Misty Forest, ruled by a cruel and sadistic black dragon. Yet for all their power and sinister majesty, even these chromatic-aligned dragon empires did not exist in harmony, and it is during this time that dragonkind would begin to show what is perhaps their most distinct set of character traits: strong individuality, greed, and an immense pride that overtly crosses over into arrogance. Their dominance was marked by a volatile peace, one often punctured by skirmishes and territorial disputes. Despite their shared heritage, each dragon lord sought to expand and enrich their own domain, even at the expense of one another, all to spread their own philosophies of influence, leading to an intricate dance of power plays and alliances that could never last. Each of these empires and many others lost to time served to expedite the formation of various splinter groups, each with their own religious dogma and philosophy of rule. Indeed, the seeds of discord now began to germinate. Draconic dominance had spread rapidly, no doubt, but it would not always be this easy to lord influence across the realm, as challengers would arise both internally and externally. But still, there is little doubt in these early stages of the Dawn Age, it was the time of dragons. Conflict and strife would have a profound impact on this era, as conflict and strife are known to do. And one of the more significant and enduring series of conflicts would collectively come to be known as the Draco Holy Wars and represents a critical chapter in the realm's historical record. A series of internecine conflicts that erupted around negative 29,500 DR illustrate a tumultuous period in the chronicle of draconic rise and rule over the Forgotten Realms. Born from ideological schisms, dragons began to differ profoundly in their desired stewardship over the realm they now began to dominate. At the heart of these wars lay a multitude of draconic ideologies, each as varied as the metallic and chromatic colors they each wore. Some dragon lords advocated for a rule that emphasized their divine right to shepherd the lesser races as benevolent overseers. Others took a more tyrannical stance, insisting on their supremacy and the subjugation of all other beings under their claw. Yet other factions sought isolation, preferring to withdraw from worldly affairs altogether, to delve deeper into their arcane studies or to hoard their treasures. These wars, principally fought amongst dragonkind, were deeply rooted in the theological and philosophical divergences that were rapidly forming, most of which stemmed directly from their own draconic pantheon. At the center of this conflict was debate over the nature and alignment of Asgaroth, also known as Io, who was for the vast majority of dragons their deity of creation. I have an entire volume dedicated to Asgaroth, link in the show notes if you'd like to know more about the dragon god's story. But it is this theological strife that would forever divide the nature of dragonkind. Asgaroth, also known as the Ninefold God, another of I think 7 official names for him, or her, long story, watch the video. Nonetheless, Asgaroth encapsulated the full spectrum of draconic nature, becoming a mirror in which every dragon could see their own beliefs reflected and magnified. To the most malevolent dragons, Asgaroth was a symbol of tyranny and might, while to the most benevolent, the deity portrayed wisdom and guardianship. As such, Asgaroth's influence was both pervasive and profound, a representation to all dragons despite their alignment of their truth. This only served to embolden the many starkly contrasting philosophies, with each dragon believing their ideology, their philosophy, was divine. This inevitability fueled the continual eruption of hostilities, the most notable of which was the Dragonfall War. The most profound of the many conflicts and battles of the Draco Holy War period was unquestionably the Dragonfall War, a far-reaching conflict that is generally accepted as the official demarcation of good versus evil among dragonkind. Sparked by the slaying of the celebrated general Nagamat, the ruthless dragon met his end at the hands of followers of Bahamut, known in this era as Zymor. This death of a favored dragon of Tiamat sent ripples through the draconic empires, with Tiamat's followers crying out for vengeance against the insolence of Bahamut's devotees. This act, bold and resonant, soon transcended beyond a struggle or a clash over philosophy. It was a clarion call to all dragonkind to choose a side, representing support for or a direct challenge to the ideologies of good and evil, held by and marking forever hatred between two sibling gods. In her fury, Tiamat bred a brood of aberrant spawn, beings of pure malice, an embodiment of the Dragon Queen's own aminus and wrath. They were called the spawn of Tiamat. In response, Bahamut sought to counterbalance by creating his own progeny, the Dragonborn. Now, you would be forgiven for confusing these draconic beings of light and justice with the Dragonborn you are most likely familiar with in today's 5th edition. But these are not the same. They are instead a nascent race, voluntarily reborn of divine intent and purpose, and introduced in the 3rd edition. These unique dragonkind, forever hence labeled as the Dragonborn of Bahamut, were forged in the image of the Platinum Dragon himself, through the rite of rebirth, a volunteer ritual to transform good-aligned, non-draconic humanoids into Dragonborn champions with the sole purpose of defeating the evil spawn of Tiamat. The Dragonborn, as the more familiar, canonical, and playable race, would not be introduced until the 4th edition, and for all intents and purposes share very little other than a name and a mostly untraceable lineage and ancestry, more through divine creation than any actual bloodline. Tiamat and Bahamut, representing two diametrically opposed principles, each viewed the Dragonfall War as the fight for the very soul of dragonkind, and each of their loyal followers sought to amplify their deity's ethos. Regardless, the lesser races found themselves caught in the crossfire, their fates hanging on the whims of their draconic overlords. The enduring conflict shaped not only the geography of the land, but the destinies and kingdoms and the lives of countless creatures. Concluding what most modern-day scholars tabulate as centuries of battle, approximately 5, the Dragonfall War ended not with a singular, decisive conflict, nor a clear victor, but with a gradual and grudging acceptance of a new, prevailing balance of power. In the aftermath, the most defining outcome of both the Dragonfall War and the Draco Holy Wars at large was a philosophical shift among the dragons of the realm. Initially pawns in a divine game, many began to view the incessant fighting and the gods that condoned such conflicts as unworthy of their worship. Each variant now began to assert their own identity, to find their own path and place in the realm, one that was neither subservient to dragon nor deity. Ironically, this shift marked the beginning of religious apathy amongst all true dragon species, that mostly persists to this day. A stark contrast to the fervor that had ignited the Holy Wars in the first place, and leading to the decline of the draconic pantheon, and thus altering the very course of draconic history. The Dawn Age thus far has been a period predominantly defined by the reign of dragons and the quiet rise of the Giants of Ostoria, but the seeds of change would first be planted by the emergence of a new influential player on the landscape. Circa negative 27,000 Dale reckoning, the elven races of Arvandor embarked on a historic journey, one that would lead them across plains and into the heart of these forgotten realms. The narrative of the elves' first migration to Toril is woven tightly with the magic and mystery of the Feywild, or the realm of fairy if you prefer. Their migration began in that land of ethereal beauty, a realm of magic and boundless nature where the elves lived in harmony with the natural conduit of forces that coursed throughout the land. And it was from this realm of everlasting twilight that the elves first found their way through the arcane portals that bridged worlds. Many sages posit the elves' journey to Toril for far more than their pioneering spirit or a desire to settle new lands. Learning of the draconic rule and dominance upon the land, there is strong evidence to suggest that undermining the dragons was the elven plan from the outset. Whatever the case, upon their arrival, the elves found a world that was both wondrous and dangerous. Toril, with its untamed lands and just emerging civilizations, offered a canvas ripe for the touch and lasting imprint of elven artistry and culture. That is, if they should survive. The green, or wild elves, as the more pedantic of sages would prefer, with their innate affinity for nature, found solace and kinship in the verdant expanse of these new lands. They settled among the scattered tribes, easily acclimating to the very forests and groves that mirrored the majesty of their Feywild homes. However, another of elven kind, the Illithiri, later known as Dark Elves and the ancestors to the Drow, sought a peaceful coexistence with the dominant dragons of the realm, successfully negotiating a delicate balance between respect and autonomy. While the sincerity of that negotiation can and should be questioned by many, the mastery and skill of that achievement against the arrogance of a ruling draconic class can't be overstated. Nonetheless, this coexistence marked a very important time for the elves, allowing the nascent civilization a peaceful period of learning and adaptation for the elves as they navigated the complexities of a world ruled by creatures as ancient and powerful as the dragons. A grace afforded the elves at a steep cost to dragonkind. Their dark elf settlement of Tornash was the first elven kingdom on Toril, a place where the songs of the Feywild mingled with the whispers of their ancient world. The elven arrival introduced a new and certainly unforeseen dynamic to the power structures of the time. Their ability to successfully establish a settlement in these realms at what was a most precarious time would have far-reaching implications, for the dragons to be sure, but also for many of the lesser humanoid races that many modern-day scholars and sages often overlook, arguably as a matter of their own bias. Regardless, this first elven foray into these burgeoning realms would also lay the groundwork for future elven migrations to Toril, such as Prince Durothil and the Golden Elves of Tintigir over 2 millennia later. Through elegant diplomacy and their intrinsic ability to tap into the magical weave of this world, the elves would go on to securely establish themselves as a growing force. and it would not be long before they would be the catalyst for one of the most pivotal moments of this era, an act that would firmly write the elves into the history of the Forgotten Realms. The epoch that followed the Draco Holy Wars, circa negative 28,000 Dale Reckoning, was one of quiet but colossal significance, if you'll excuse the pun. For during the last 2 millennia of this Dawn Age was also the time of giants, and the rise of their own great empire of Ostoria, ruled by the fabled Anum the Allfather and his 8 sons, or maybe it's 9 if you count the two-headed one twice. The Kingdom of Giants was now an empire of staggering size, with its reach extended across much of the known world. Now 2,000 years later, with elven migrations upon the realm and the colossal kingdom casting its own long shadow across the land, the dragon dominance was, for the first time, challenged. A clash was inevitable, and the defining conflict of the era was the Thousand-Year War. The flashpoint for this war was sparked circa negative 26,000 Dale Reckoning by an act of audacious aggression from Garrix, the dragon god of fire, destruction, and renewal. His avatar, a massive red dragon of power and fervor, led a fiery onslaught against the giants. As the two major forces of the realm clashed, the giants found themselves pitted against the rising might of the dragons in a protracted and comprehensive war that spanned the breadth of the continent. The giants, with their immense strength and ancient heritage, were certainly formidable opponents, possessing a deep connection to the land and a profound understanding of its various elemental forces, which they harnessed in their struggle against the incumbent power of the realm in the dragons. However, dragonkind were able to leverage all of their advantages. Equipped with flight, fearsome physical prowess, and their innate magical capabilities, they presented perhaps the only challenge to a giant-ruled realm. The dragons' aerial advantage afforded them a strategic superiority that proved to be perhaps the decisive factor in an otherwise equal force of might. Their ability to strike from the skies and employ their breath weapons with devastating effect turned the tide in many of the battles that dotted the landscape of this centuries-old war. Amidst the clash of dragon and titan, an ebb and flow of war tides lasting well over 10 mortal lifetimes, a subplot to the war was also unfolding, as Othea, the wife of Anum the Allfather and mother to the giant pantheon, wove her own narrative of betrayal and intrigue with her many affairs with other deities. Notable as more than scandalous trysts, although scandalous they were, these salacious events bore the seeds of many new races. However, as the conflict wore on, it became increasingly clear that the dragons were gaining the upper hand. The giants, despite their strength and valor, were gradually forced to cede their territories and retreat to the northern reaches of the continent. The epic battles, marked by the fury of dragonfire and the power of titanic might, etched itself into the history of the very landscape, leaving scars that would become the valleys, mountains, rivers, and ravines of a Forgotten Realms geography that was wrought from the anvils of this very war. The dragons, for their part, were hardly left unscathed, bearing the many scars of battle and seeing their own dominion and empires wane as well. But in the end, Ostoria, the giants' colossal kingdom, had been reduced to a shadowed sliver of its former glory. The giants, once rulers of a vast empire that stretched from the coldest north to the southern plains, now found themselves confined to tales of legend and the hidden places of the northernmost reaches of the world. This thousand-year war now passed into recorded tomes of study for scholars and generals alike, a war that defined an era and reshaped the land as a significant chapter that serves as a grim reminder of the impermanence of dominion and the inevitability of war when two powers rise. As the Dawn Age continued to unfold its myriad of historic events, one of the most pivotal for all races upon the land was known as the Rage of Dragons, a periodic realm-wide event that was hallmarked by the collective and uncontrolled fury of dragonkind. Circa negative 25,000 Dale Reckoning, the Rage of Dragons was not a natural occurrence, but instead precipitated by a powerful enchantment known as the Draco Rage Mythal, engineered by the realm's high elves and providing leverage in the face of draconic supremacy. To understand the power and effects of the Draco Rage mythal, you must first understand the origin and nature of the mythal itself. In the most general sense, a mythal can be any epic-level magic that is able to create a defensive ward. However, most sages and scholars agree that there are varied distinctions attributed to these epic magics, with the high or true mythal being the first great mythals of the Elven high mages. Later wizards and other non-Elven masters of the arcane would create similar and even equally powerful mythals, but their authorship, as not of Elven kind, would label these as wizard or near mythals. With that understanding, let us recall the account of the Draco Rage mythal. Crafted by Elven high mages, this high mythal was a complex magic able to tap into the very magical weave of the realm itself. The High Elves, whose relationship with dragonkind had been one of wary coexistence, sought to create a safeguard against the possibility of draconic aggression. The Draco Rage mythal was their answer. A sophisticated magical construct, it was intricately linked to a celestial phenomenon known as the King-Killer Star. The star's appearance into the night sky was the harbinger of a profound transformation. The mythal's design was such that it harnessed the energy of this passing star, channeling it to induce a state of frenzy among dragonkind. Across the realms, dragons of all colors and types were driven into a senseless and uncontrollable bloodlust, even against their own kind, their usual intellect and cunning submerged beneath a tide of primal rage. Under the influence of the mythal, dragons, by this time in their evolution typically solitary and territorial, now rampaged across the realms without regard for their own safety, their own kind, or even the preservation of their lairs and treasures. The King-Killer Star, which had been but a silent sentinel in the heavens, now became a symbol of fear and awe across the entire realm, especially to dragons. Its passing was a time of reflection for the survivors and a reminder of the delicate balance between the realms and forces that lie beyond their control. The aftermath of the Draco Rage mythal's creation saw the gradual decline of dragon-ruled realms and the emergence of new powers, setting the stage for the rise of humanoid races, most notably, or at least first, the Elven civilizations, in an age known as the First Flowering. And that concludes Volume 4 in our grand history of these Forgotten Realms. I hope you will join me for our next volume, number 5, where we will go pretty heavy into the history and lore of the elves upon these realms, 12,000 years worth. If you'd like to support the channel, please check out the links below, and if you think I earned it, please like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and until next time, remember, the only limitation at your table is your imagination.